Imagine walking home after a long day, only to be stopped by the police because someone thought you didn't belong. What would you do? A teenager's ordinary walk turns into a life-changing moment when his mother steps in. But what happens when the truth hits harder than the accusation? The sun hung low over Crestville Grove, casting a golden glow over the perfectly manicured lawns and freshly sealed driveways. The neighborhood was the picture of affluence, quiet, pristine, and orderly, with not a single crack in the sidewalks. The only sounds were the occasional bark of a dog or the hum of a luxury car rolling down the street. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and anything out of the ordinary stood out like a sore thumb. Adrian Taylor adjusted the strap of his gym bag as he walked, his headphones blasting music that drowned out the world around him. At 16, he was tall and athletic, his denim jacket covering his white shirt. After a grueling workout at Jefferson High, he was exhausted, both from the drills and from the long day of classes, but he had decided to take a shortcut through Crestville instead of waiting for the bus. His best friend lived just a few blocks away, so he wasn't entirely unfamiliar with the neighborhood. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here, not in the way the residents did, at least. As he walked, Adrian's mind wandered. He thought about the game coming up, the homework he still needed to finish, and the text he'd gotten from his mom earlier. "Be home by 6. Love you." He glanced at his phone. He had time. He switched his playlist, the bass from his headphones thumping in his ears, and kept walking, oblivious to the eyes watching him from behind a large bay window. Inside one of the pristine homes, Karen Lowell sat in her living room, a cup of tea cooling on the table beside her. She had lived in Crestville Grove for 15 years, and in that time, she had come to know every face, every car, and every routine on her street. She prided herself on being a good neighbor, someone who looked out for the community. But today, something didn't sit right with her. From her window, she could see a teenage boy, black, tall, and athletic, walking alone with a gym bag slung over his shoulder. He wasn't running or causing trouble, but something about him made her uneasy. She couldn't place it, but the feeling gnawed at her. Maybe he's just passing through, she thought. Maybe he has a reason to be here. But doubt crept in, fast and unrelenting. What if he's up to something? What if I ignore it and later tonight I see a story on the news about a break-in just a few houses down? Karen's fingers tightened around her phone. She hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't want to overreact, but the pit in her stomach told her otherwise. Better safe than sorry, right? She took a deep breath and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood," she said, her voice steady but her fingers gripping the phone just a little too tightly. "He's walking down my street, looking around like he's scoping out houses. I don't know who he is, and he's carrying a bag." The dispatcher's voice remained calm. "Can you describe him?" Karen's lips tightened. "He's, tall, black, wearing a jacket and gym shorts. He has a bag. I don't know, but it doesn't look right." The dispatcher asked if the young man was doing anything illegal. Karen hesitated. "Well, no, not exactly, but I've never seen him before. This is a quiet neighborhood." That was enough. The dispatcher assured her that officers would be sent to check it out. Karen hung up, still watching as Adrian stopped briefly to switch his playlist. He had no idea what was coming. A few streets away, Officers Reynolds and Vega were in their squad car when the call came through. Possible prowler, Crestville Grove. Male, black, mid-teens, carrying a bag. Reynolds, a stocky officer with 15 years on the force, glanced at Vega, who was younger and still learning the ropes. "Let's check it out," he said, flipping on the lights and speeding toward the neighborhood. Adrian was 2 blocks from home when he heard it, the sharp whoop of a police siren behind him. He turned, confused, just as the squad car pulled up fast. The doors flew open, and 2 officers stepped out, hands near their holsters. "Hey, stop right there," Reynolds demanded. Adrian froze, pulling out his headphones. "What's going on? What's in the bag?" Reynolds asked, his tone sharp. Adrian blinked. My basketball gear. I'm headed home." His voice was steady, but his chest tightened. He knew this wasn't just a random stop. Vega stepped closer. "You live here?" "Yes, sir. A few blocks over." Reynolds scoffed. "That right? What's the address?" Adrian started to answer, but before he could, Vega grabbed his bag. "Hey, that's my stuff," Adrian protested. "Relax," Reynolds muttered, unzipping the bag and rummaging through it. Shoes, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle, nothing suspicious. But Reynolds wasn't done. "Why'd you cut through this neighborhood?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Adrian's heart pounded. "It's just a shortcut. I'm not doing anything wrong." Vega looked at Reynolds, uncertain. Maybe he's telling the truth. Reynolds didn't budge. "Then why'd someone call the cops on him?" Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but his breath caught as he noticed something over the officer's shoulders. A sleek black SUV rolling toward them. Pulled up sharply, and the doors opened. Out stepped Erica Taylor, the mayor of Riverdale. The air seemed to shift the moment Erica stepped out of the SUV. She wasn't just any mother. She was the mayor, and she carried herself like it. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer and heels that clicked against the pavement, she moved with purpose, not running, not panicked, but controlled. A woman who was used to walking into rooms where people doubted her authority and reminding them exactly who she was. Her eyes locked onto the two officers standing over her son. The tension in the air was palpable as Erica Taylor stepped out of her SUV, her presence commanding immediate attention. Her sharp navy blazer and heels clicked against the pavement, each step deliberate and measured. She wasn't running. She wasn't panicked. She was in control. Her eyes locked onto the two officers standing over her son, Adrian, who was still clutching his gym bag, his face a mix of confusion and relief. Officer Reynolds, the stockier of the two, straightened his posture as Erica approached. He had seen her before on the news at city meetings, but it took a moment for his brain to catch up. This wasn't just any mother. This was the mayor of Riverdale. Vega, the younger officer, shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Reynolds and Erica, unsure of how to proceed. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Vega said, his voice wavering slightly. "We're handling a situation here." Erica didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "Oh, I see that," she said, her tone cutting through the tension like a knife. "And what exactly is the situation?" Reynolds cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area," he said, gesturing toward Adrian. "We stopped him to ask some questions. We need to confirm if he actually lives here." Erica arched an eyebrow, her expression a mix of disbelief and disdain. "Suspicious?" she repeated, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen a few times. Then she held it up for the officers to see. On the screen was Adrian's student ID, their home address, and a picture of the two of them at a community event just last month. "That's my son," she said, her voice firm. "Adrian Taylor. He lives here. He was walking home from basketball practice. So, tell me, officers, did you stop him because he was suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Vega shifted his weight from one foot to the other, while Reynolds's jaw tightened. Neither of them had an answer. Behind them, Karen Lowell stood frozen in her doorway, her hand clutching the edge of the doorframe. She had recognized Erica the moment she stepped out of the SUV, and the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had called the police on the mayor's son. She had called the police on a kid who was just walking home. Her stomach churned as she watched the scene unfold, her mind racing with a mix of guilt and fear. Erica took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving the officers. The air felt heavier now, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what she would do next. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't have to. Her voice was steady, precise, and carried the weight of someone who was used to being heard. "You searched his bag," she said, her tone cutting through the silence. "You questioned where he lived. You assumed he didn't belong. Is that your procedure? To treat a teenage boy walking home like a criminal?" Reynolds squared his shoulders, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "We were just following protocol, ma'am," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We got a call about a suspicious person, and we responded accordingly." Erica tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Protocol?" she repeated, letting the word linger. "So, your protocol is to stop and search a black teenager based on a call from someone who thought he looked out of place? Is that it?" Vega shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Reynolds for guidance. "We were just doing our job," he said weakly. Erica took another step forward, her presence commanding the space. "Your job," she said, her voice low but firm, "is to protect and serve, not to harass and intimidate. My son was doing nothing wrong. He was walking home. And yet, here we are." Adrian stood quietly beside his mother, his hands clenched at his sides. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the flashing lights, the way the officers had searched his bag like he was a criminal, the way they had looked through him, not at him. He glanced at his mom, her sharp blazer and heels a stark contrast to the casual wear of the officers. She was his shield, his protector, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this shouldn't have happened in the first place. Erica turned her attention to Karen, who was still standing in her doorway, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Was it you?" Erica asked, her voice cutting through the distance between them. "Did you call the police on my son?" Karen opened her mouth, then shut it. The weight of the moment crushed her. She had thought she was being cautious, protecting her neighborhood. But now, faced with Erica's piercing gaze, she realized the truth. She had acted out of fear of someone who didn't look like her, who didn't belong in her mind. Her face turned red, and she swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. "I just thought," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Erica cut her off. "You thought what? That a black teenager with a gym bag was a threat? That he didn't belong here? Do you know what could have happened today? My son could have been tackled, arrested, slammed against a squad car for resisting, or worse. And all because you decided that the sight of him was enough to dial 911. Karen looked down, unable to meet Erica's gaze. Her stomach twisted as the reality of her actions sank in. She had thought she was being cautious, but now she saw the truth. She had been afraid of something she didn't understand, afraid of someone who didn't fit her idea of what a neighbor should look like. The officers, sensing the shift in the dynamic, began to backpedal. Reynolds cleared his throat. "If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way," he said, his tone dismissive. Erica exhaled sharply, her disappointment evident. "That's it?" she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "You stopped my son, search his bag, treat him like a criminal, and now you just walk away?" Vega hesitated. "Look, we were just responding to a call," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Erica shook her head, her expression a mix of anger and resignation. "Yeah, you were," she said quietly. She turned back to Adrian and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, baby. Let's go home." Adrian slung his bag over his shoulder and followed his mother to the SUV, his heart still racing. The officers walked back to their squad car, muttering under their breath, while Karen remained frozen in her doorway, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched them drive away. For Adrian, for Erica, and for every black family that has had to explain their existence in spaces they have every right to be in, this wasn't over. Erica gripped the wheel tightly as she drove through the familiar streets of Crestville Grove, her mind racing. Adrian sat beside her, staring out the window, lost in thought. He was staring out the window, his gym bag resting at his feet. His mind raced, replaying the scene over and over. The flashing lights, the officer's hands on his bag, their questions, their suspicion. He felt a mix of anger, embarrassment, and something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. Erica gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. She had always known this day might come. As a black mother, she had prepared herself for the possibility that her son would be treated differently because of the color of his skin. But knowing it could happen and actually experiencing it were two very different things. Her heart ached for Adrian, for the innocence he had lost in that moment, and for the harsh reality he now had to face. After a few minutes, Erica broke the silence. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Adrian let out a slow breath, his eyes still fixed on the passing houses. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't get it. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just walking home." Erica nodded, her gaze focused on the road ahead. "I get it," she said. "And I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Adrian turned to her, his brow furrowed. "What would have happened if you weren't there?" he asked, his voice tinged with fear. "What if you didn't show up?" Erica's stomach clenched at the question. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him that everything would have been fine, but she couldn't lie to him. She knew the truth, that things could have gone very differently. Instead of answering directly, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "You did everything right, Adrian," she said. "You kept your cool, you answered their questions, and you stood your ground. I'm proud of you." Adrian sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It still didn't matter, though," he said quietly. "They still treated me like I was some kind of criminal." Erica glanced at him, her heart breaking at the resignation in his voice. She knew this wasn't just about today. It was about every story like this, every black child who had to learn too early that the world didn't always see them as innocent. It was about every parent who had to teach their kids how to navigate a world that saw them as a threat first and a person second. "It's not fair," Erica said after a moment, "and it's not right. But the reality is this is something we have to deal with. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do. It's because of how some people see us. And that's on them, not you." Adrian nodded, but the weight of the moment still hung heavy in the air. He looked out the window again, his mind drifting to the woman who had called the police. "Do you think she'll do it again?" he asked. "Call the cops on someone else, I mean." Erica hesitated, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I hope today made her think. I hope it made her realize that her actions have consequences." Meanwhile, back in Crestville Grove, Karen Lowell sat alone in her living room, staring at the phone in her hands. The same phone she had used to call 911. The same phone that could have been the reason Adrian never made it home. Her stomach twisted as the reality of what she had done sank in. She had thought she was being cautious, protecting her neighborhood. But now, faced with the aftermath, she realized the truth. She had acted out of fear of someone who didn't look like her, who didn't fit her idea of what a neighbor should be. Karen's mind raced as she replayed the events in her head. She thought about Adrian, just a kid walking home from basketball practice. She thought about Erica, the mayor, who had stepped in to defend her son with a strength and composure that left Karen in awe. And she thought about her assumptions, her biases and fear. She had to ask herself the question she had spent her whole life avoiding. What if the danger wasn't him? What if it was her? Her hands trembled as she set the phone down on the coffee table. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her, followed by a deep sense of shame. She had always considered herself a good person, someone who cared about her community. But now, she had to confront the uncomfortable truth that her actions had been rooted in prejudice, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Karen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The same street where Adrian had been walking just an hour ago. The same street where she had watched him being stopped by the police, where she had seen Erica step in and take control of the situation. She thought about the way Erica had looked at her, the way her words had cut through Karen's defenses and forced her to see the truth. "What have I done?" Karen whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. She felt tears welling up in her eyes as the weight of her actions settled over her. She had called the police on a kid who was just walking home. A kid who could have been her own son, if circumstances were different. A kid who didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal. Karen sank back into her chair, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't undo what she had done, but she also knew she couldn't just sit there and do nothing. She had to make this right. She had to confront her own biases, to understand where they came from and how to change them. She had to do better. As the sun set over Crestville Grove, the neighborhood returned to its usual quiet, but the events of the afternoon lingered in the air. For Adrian and Erica, the day had been a harsh reminder of the world they lived in. For Karen, it had been a wake-up call, a moment of reckoning that would force her to confront the uncomfortable truths about herself and the society she lived in. The evening settled over Crestville Grove, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. The neighborhood, usually a picture of tranquility, felt different tonight, charged with an unspoken tension that lingered in the air. For Adrian, Erica, and Karen, the events of the afternoon had left an indelible mark, one that would shape their thoughts and actions in the days to come. Adrian sat on the edge of his bed, still in his basketball shorts and simple white shirt, his gym bag lying discarded on the floor. He stared at his hands, his mind replaying the scene over and over. The flashing lights, the officer's hands on his bag, their questions, their suspicion. He felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. Anger, frustration, fear, and something deeper, something that made his chest ache. There was a soft knock on his door, and Erica stepped in, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to Adrian and sat down beside him, her presence calming but firm. For a moment, they sat in silence, the warmth of the mugs grounding them. "You know," Erica began, her voice gentle but steady, "what happened today wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Adrian nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I know," he said quietly, "but it still feels like I did. Like just being me is enough to make people think I'm dangerous." Erica's heart ached at his words. She reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know it feels that way," she said, "and I wish I could tell you it's going to get easier, but the truth is, this is something we have to deal with. It's not fair and it's not right, but it's the reality we live in." Adrian looked up at her, his eyes searching hers for answers she couldn't fully give. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. "How am I supposed to just live with this?" Erica took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You keep being you," she said. "You keep doing the right thing, even when it feels like the world is against you. And you remember that you're not alone. You have me, you have your family, and you have a community that loves and supports you. We're in this together." Adrian nodded, though the weight of her words didn't fully lift the heaviness in his chest. He took a sip of his hot chocolate, the sweetness a small comfort in the midst of everything. "I just wish it didn't have to be like this," he said softly. "Me too," Erica replied. "But we can't control how other people see us. All we can do is control how we respond. And today you handled yourself with dignity and strength. I'm so proud of you." Adrian managed a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks, Mom," he said. "I just don't want to feel like this every time I walk down the street." Erica squeezed his shoulder. "I know," she said, "and we're going to keep fighting to make sure that one day you won't have to." Across the neighborhood, Karen couldn't shake the weight of what had happened. She glanced at the phone on the table, the device that had set everything in motion. Had she really done that? She felt a mix of emotions that made her chest ache. She thought about Adrian, just a kid walking home from basketball practice. She thought about Erica, the mayor, who had stepped in to defend her son with a strength and composure that left Karen in awe. And she thought about herself, her assumptions, her biases, her fear. She had to confront the uncomfortable truth that her actions had been rooted in prejudice, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Karen stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The same street where Adrian had been walking just a few hours ago. The same street where she had watched him being stopped by the police, where she had seen Erica step in and take control of the situation. She thought about the way Erica had looked at her, the way her words had cut through Karen's defenses and forced her to see the truth. "What have I done?" Karen whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. She felt tears welling up in her eyes as the weight of her actions settled over her. She had called the police on a kid who was just walking home. A kid who could have been her own son if circumstances were different. A kid who didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal. Karen sank back into her chair, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't undo what she had done, but she also knew she couldn't just sit there and do nothing. She had to make this right. She had to confront her own biases, to understand where they came from and how to change them. She had to do better. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she opened her contacts. She scrolled through until she found the number for the local community center, where they offered workshops on racial bias and cultural sensitivity. She hesitated for a moment, then dialed the number. "Hi," she said when someone answered. "I'd like to sign up for your next workshop on racial bias." "Yes, the one next week." "Thank you." As she hung up, Karen felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She knew she had a long way to go, but she was determined to do the work. She owed it to Adrian, to Erica, and to herself. The night deepened, the stars appearing one by one in the sky above Crestville Grove. For Adrian, Erica, and Karen, the events of the afternoon had been a turning point, a moment of reckoning that would shape their thoughts and actions in the days to come. For Adrian, it was a harsh reminder of the world he lived in, but also a reminder of the strength and support he had in his mother and his community. For Erica, it was a call to continue fighting for justice and equality, not just for her son, but for all Black children who faced the same challenges. And for Karen, it was a wake-up call, a moment of self-reflection that would force her to confront her own biases and work toward becoming a better person. What would you have done if you were in Karen's shoes? Or Erica's? This story reminds us that our actions have consequences, and sometimes the real danger lies in our own biases. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more thought-provoking stories.